Good afternoon, one and all. I think we've got sound going. Yes, we have. That's always a nerving moment. Thank you for being here. Welcome to 2023 revision for Edexcel GCSE PE. My name's James. I appreciate you being here. Thank you. I have my colleague who's going to be dealing with the chat and the comments here with me. Her name is Marta.
Hello, James.
Marta is Spanish.
Happen to be, yes.
There's a fact. Yeah. It just happens to be. Born there.
True fact.
Couple of things, folks. We would be super grateful if you could subscribe to the YouTube channel for us. You can do that from the hub page or from the YouTube if you're watching it from there. Please subscribe, hit a like. It's a tiny little thing. You know, even if you don't watch any of our videos in the future because you're moving on to other stuff, hit a subscribe because it actually really boosts the channel and makes it more visible for others. So thank you very much in advance for that. Next, I mentioned comments and questions. We have disabled YouTube chat. We learned the hard way a couple of years ago that educational settings and YouTube chats aren't necessarily conducive, so we haven't got that. But on the hub page, we do have a live chat in there, and you can get hold of us on any of our social media whatsoever. And in the last session, we just finished an AQA session a moment ago, we got lots and lots of shout outs, and it was a really lovely way to end the session. So if you'd like your bit mentioned, it's only me, you know, whatever, but it would be nice if you do that. It makes a bit of community, so thank you. Before we get started, resources and timing. Ideally, in this session, you will have with you, obviously, the session itself. You'll have the notes pages, which are again on the hub page or on the description of the YouTube video. You'll have access to the national mock exam. You'll have access to the mark scheme for that, and you'll have access to the model answers, as well as the infographic. If you've got that somewhere near you or on your computer, on your iPad or whatever, those are really valuable resources, and we really hope you might consider using those in the final few days of the last 2 weeks preparing for your paper 1 exam and then eventually for paper 2 as well. Of course, and also in terms of timing, we anticipate this session to be around about an hour, 10, an hour, 15 minutes. It won't be any longer than that, okay? So there, we sort of aim for an hour, but it's often around about an hour and 15, that sort of thing. So just bear that one in mind. Now, I will go fast in this session. I am cramming a huge amount in. You may feel at times like your pen, my digital pen's going to be going like crazy. You might feel like yours is as well. Remember, this is available on demand, and if you have to go back to something, what was it James said, you can go and do that, and we urge you to do exactly that with us. Marta, unless you tell me otherwise, we're going to jump in to this session. I'm going to get my headphones ready on the go, and we're going to get straight into this. Anything before we do so?
No, let's crack on.
Beautiful. So hopefully this is going to work for us. Bear with me, folks. Here we go. So, okay, my brilliant young people doing Edexcel GCSE PE out there, a couple of reminders of things that I want you to be aware of. Yes, we're doing 2023 revision, but I want you to remember that in combination with this show, which you might be doing live and on demand, hopefully here with me right now, but you should have your notes pages. They're going to look like what you've got on the screen, but white rather than black like mine. You should have your exam infographics. That's available just below the show on the hub page, or if you're on YouTube, go and click on it. It takes the hub page. You should have the national mock exam. This is the national mock exam. Maybe you've attempted it, maybe you haven't, maybe you're using it as part of your revision, but you need your national mock exam paper, the mark scheme that goes with it, and we've written model answers. Now, if you use those resources in combination with this session and as a general preparation for your paper 1 exam, it's going to put you in a really strong position. It doesn't cover everything on paper 1, it's quite a lot of material, but it covers a large swathe of it, and more importantly, it develops the specific skills that you require for this particular assessment. So I strongly recommend that. Teachers, do support your students to do that if you're able to. Secondly, you'll notice that we've got performer profiles. We've got Josh, we've got Tom, we've got Kate, we've got Laura, we've got Julie, we've got Carlos. Okay, I just did an impression of Ali G there. But here, the thing I want you to be aware of with these performers is that every time we cover a piece of material today or a skill today, you've got the capacity to amplify that by coming across or coming back to your performer profiles and saying, right, okay, how does this apply to this one, this one, this one? What about energy? What about movement patterns? And so on and so on and so on, and linking it continuously back. And you'll hear me doing that as part of the show as well. And finally, before we jump into this, folks, I just stress to you, this is what we're covering in totality. This material is what was in the Paper 1 National Mock Exam. Now, just to be clear, this is not the whole of Paper 1. There are things that aren't there. You'll notice, for example, functions of the skeleton, for example, isn't there. But what we're going to cover today is we're going to cover this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. Here, you get the idea. Okay? Now, I have chosen that material out as, I don't know, the most relevant, the amount I can squeeze into about an hour, etc., etc., etc. But can I stress to you that in combination with the mock paper, with the model answers, with the mark scheme, with the infographic, this as a whole, you can get really good coverage across this material. Okay, so do go and use those resources as well. So that's what we're going to do today. Oh, and by the way, just to stress, look, that number there, like 47, that is saying that's the extent to which this material has been covered in previous papers, the number of marks available. So therefore, it's really important to us, right? And you might see other things that are a little bit lower. Does that mean they're not coming up? No, it probably means they are coming up, but we need to, we just need to be aware of them. Maybe they're due, I don't know. Okay, so topic 1, folks, we're going straight into bone classification, or the classification of bones. So we've got 4 things that the skeleton does. We've got 4 types of bones that the skeleton occupies, I should say, and we're going to cover all of them here. So first of all, by far the most obvious is we've got long bones. Now these are clearly the femur, the humerus, the ulna, the radius. We could go a little bit further with that. I suppose we could put in tibia, we could put in fibula. What these bones are specialised for is leverage. Remember that bones, especially what we call the appendicular skeleton, the bits that move the most, the skeleton is sort of often designed to have muscle attachment, and of course part of a lever is having like a rigid bar like this. Well, that rigid bar is the long bone. So if we put a fulcrum on it and we put an effort on it, that's an effort. If we put a load, then all of a sudden we've got a lever, we've got leverage, and that's what long bones are for. Now let's jump down to the bottom. Short bones. Short bones are for weight bearing. Sometimes we talk about fine movement occasionally if we're talking about that. But what we've got here as fine bones is we've got these tarsals in the upper foot, and they're excellent examples of of bones that are short but also that are weight bearing. By the way, you can also say that carpals are short bones as well, the equivalent in the fingers. We also have flat bones. You'll notice in the flat bones, they sort of come quite a lot to the center of the skeleton. Now in other areas of study we could call that like the axial skeleton, but anyway, notice we've got the pelvis, the sternum, the ribs, the cranium. Now what these bones do predominantly, okay folks, what they do predominantly is they protect. Okay, you'll notice, for example, we've got the pelvis protecting the reproductive organs. They're a broad surface, so they've got a lot of coverage, and that allows for muscle attachment. So we've got lots of, like the scapula here You'd be surprised how many muscles we've got. The teres minor, we've got the subscapularis, we've got all kinds of muscles that attach to that particular. We don't really study them in this course, but there's a lot of sort of surface area for often small intricate muscles to actually attach to. And then finally, folks, we have irregular bones, and our excellent example by the way, I've got one vertebra here, so that E shouldn't be there, but obviously together they're the vertebrae if we look at all of them, and they are there for protection. Okay, so imagine this vertebra has the spinal cord, coming up and through that gap there. It's obviously protecting that as it goes, and that does so throughout the spine. Okay, so let's move things forward. We've now got the classification of joints. What kind of joints are we actually talking about here? So first things first, we have got these that we want to be aware of. We want to be aware of pivots, hinge, ball and socket, condyloid. So we're going to cover all of those, and let's just go through them. So first of all, pivot. There are actually a couple of great examples of pivot joints in the body, but we're going to focus on what's called the neck, the atlas and axis. And the way this works is, folks, that our cranium, our old dome here, the old Swede, that actually connects or articulates. Now, Edexcel want me to tell you with the top vertebra, but it's actually the second vertebra here. It has a little kind of upward protrusion on it. It sort of goes like this, goes up like this, and then the brain kind of sits on it like this at the top of the brain. What am I talking about? The cranium sort of sits on it like this at the top. And what that allows the cranium to do is it allows it to rotate, okay, this way and that way. That's rotation. It allows us to pull the head back. This would be extension. Imagine someone who's looking up a volleyball that's coming down to them, preparing to head a football, something like that. And it allows us to do flexion. And flexion is where we push the head forward and almost look down towards the ground. So those movements are all possible at the neck as a result of that. Now, let's take this a little bit further. We also have hinge joints. And of course, we're interested in, as we see back here, we're interested in 3 hinge joints. We're interested in the elbow, we're interested in the knee, we're interested in the ankle. So let's just be clear, the elbow is the meeting point of the humerus, it is the meeting point of the radius, and it is the meeting point of the ulna, okay? So we have got all of those bones actually articulating in that place. Sorry, folks, I just had a need to sneeze there. Apologies, so I just quickly paused. Anyway, so what I was going to say, so we've got these obviously articulating bones. One of the points I want to make is the movement patterns that are available here. If that elbow is to flex and call it bend, obviously that's called flexion. If it is to straighten back up into the position we've got it now, in the anatomical position, this is what we call extension. So they are the movement patterns available here. Now that is almost identical to when we get to our knee joint. Of course, the knee, what we're talking about here is we're talking about the articulation or the joining of the femur and the tibia. Notice that I am not putting fibula in there. The fibula does not articulate at the knee. So we've got tibia and femur and tibia. And of course, if this leg is to flex and bend, that's again flexion. If it's to straighten as it is now, we've got extension. Now, it would kind of feel like common sense, right? That we would have the same sort of principle with the ankle, but the ankle is slightly different. With the ankle, we have got the tibia, we have got the fibula. Obviously, check your spellings; they cross over those words, don't they? But also down here, we've got the tarsals. Okay, so we've got these articulating bones here. By the way, the main articulating bone is called the talus. Just in case you're interested in that, we don't really cover it in this course, but it might be something you might just want to be aware of. But the point I want to make here is that the movement patterns are slightly different. When the ankle moves to point its toes down like this, of course we call that plantar flexion. Think about any kind of jumping action or takeoff, jumping for a rebound, something like that. When we curl the toes back like this, that is called dorsiflexion. Now, the one thing I have not covered here, and it's important to stress, folks, is that when we talk about these movement patterns, this is all produced by the force of muscles. Now, I'm not going to talk about the muscles here. We will talk about pairs of muscles in a second. But don't forget, the skeleton is not doing this by itself. It's doing this because muscle is applying force. How is it doing that? It's doing it via levers onto long bones to produce leverage, right? That's what we know. So just make that as an assumption. Now, let's take it further. We've got ball and socket joints. We have the hip. Just to remind you about the hip, we are talking here about the pelvis. We're talking here about the femur. Now, a couple of things I want you to be aware. This is the back of the body you can see here, by the way. So let me just put a person who's kind of, this person here is sideways on, okay? This person here is sideways on. If this person puts their leg into that position, okay, that is flexion. Think about the follow through on kicking a ball. If they put their leg into that position, and they normally often bend a bit short of that leg, that is extension of the hip, okay? But as we know as well, they can also abduct the hip. Let me try and spell that correctly. Abduction. And they can also bring it back into here. That's adduction. Don't forget as well that this can also kind of rotate around its axis. Okay, so we do get examples of rotation as well. And those movement patterns are identical to the shoulder. And the shoulder, of course, we have got the humerus and we have got the scapula. Okay, and the only difference here is in comparison to the movements I talked about is that the shoulder's sort of able to do this movement, which is kind of like all the way around in sort of an overarm cricket bowling action like this, and that is called circumduction. Okay, circumduction. So look out for those movements in movement patterns and movement analysis. Finally, we've got the condyloid joints. Now, I want to be specific here. The condyloid joint refers to the joints between here and here, okay? This is a condyloid joint. Now, the condyloid joint effectively, and by the way, as you can see there, this is the radius, this is the ulna, this is the carpals. So, essentially here, what we're talking about is a joint that can go through flexion. Okay, now in this case, flexion is when you sort of point your fingers down towards the sort of the inside of your wrist, and it can also do extension. Extension is when you pull your wrist back, you know, like the preparation position of bowling a cricket ball or something like that. So look out for those movement patterns. Those are the joints that we're interested in at this point. Okay, let's move on to antagonistic muscle pairs. So a couple of things I really want to get across here. I'm not going to go sort of like through every single muscle of the body. I'm sure you guys can do that. It's a long list. You can do that yourselves. But in terms of antagonistic muscle pairs, I want to remind you of the main principles. Muscles always work in combination. So just to be clear about this, an individual, you might be in the gym and think, right, I'm working with biceps here. Your bicep can do nothing by itself. It needs a mate. It needs something to counteract, be its ballast, just as the tricep does in reverse. They are useless in isolation, okay? So muscles always work in combination. Secondly, one muscle, and actually I'm telling you a lie here to an extent, one muscle is the agonist. I'll see if you can figure out why I might be telling you a lie. But one muscle is the agonist, and it's important to stress with the agonist, this is the muscle that is contracting. Okay, so there's one muscle that is contracting at any one time, and there is one muscle is the antagonist, which is relaxing. Now, that is true for all but one circumstance, and I'll see if you can figure out what that is. But one muscle is the agonist in contracting, one muscle is the antagonist in relaxing. So while one contracts, one relaxes. My goodness, we could make a song out of it. Nevertheless, that's the principle we want to get across. Now, we could go further. I could really talk about the physics of that with you, but in the context of this, we'll just keep it simple. So what are these pairs and how do they work? Well, and by the way, see if you can remember. I want to see why it might be not true that one is always contracting. Or sip your tea. Okay, so pairs of muscles first of all. In this image here, we've got muscle A. This is the tricep. Okay, tricep, back of the upper arm here, and muscle B is the bicep. These muscles, and you'll notice they're on either sides of, in this case, a long bone for leverage, as we mentioned earlier. But these muscles are operating as a pair. Now, one of the key things I would stress to you here is, let's assume this fella is on the upward trajectory, he's in the upward phase, right? What we find here is the tricep is contracting and shortening its elbow extension. And of course, what's happening then is that is the agonist, whereas the bicep is relaxing and allowing it to happen. This is the antagonist. Now, interestingly, if we came in the other direction, I'm not going to go there. Anyway, so that's that. Secondly, what do we have here? We have B, I'll just do it in sort of image order. We have B, which are the gluteals, okay, the sort of the buttocks, the butt cheeks. And we have A here, which are the hip flexors, Okay, now again, let's imagine our performer here is now on the way back up. Okay, what would we find here? Let's focus on this right leg. What would happen here is that that right leg would, in essence, start to come in back into this middle position. Therefore, our hip flex would be the agonist, and our gluteals would be the antagonist. Excuse me. Now let's finish this off. Down here, we've got two more. I've got hiccups, great timing. A is our quadricep. Don't forget that pesky little S on the back. Group of muscles, by the way, 4 of them in there. I'm not going to name them. They've got some mad names. If you want to learn it, you can. And B here, we've got the hamstrings, 3 of those fellas. Again, some great names in there for those muscles. But it's a muscle group, hence the plural, right? That's the point I wanted to make. Now, again, let's imagine the fella's on his way up. Say, what's happening here? Well, the knee joint would be going from a flex position, in essence, to a extended position. The agonist, therefore, would be the quadricep. The antagonist would be the hamstrings. And finally, folks, we have got some of our absolute favourite spellings. We have got the gastrocnemius, and we have got the tibialis anterior. Let me just check something while I'm writing that down. Just bear with me 1 second. Yes, tibialis anterior. I just had a sort of a brain flash there. It is tibialis anterior, named on the Edexcel spec. I'm teaching all of these courses at the moment, and yes, it is. So we're absolutely fine. So gastrocnemius, tibialis, they are a pair. Let's remember that. And again, let's imagine our fella here is in the same upwards movement. What we'd find here is, in essence, what's happening is, although it might not seem it, the feet would stay flat. This shin bone, which is kind of here, would move to this kind of position, right, in that sort of straight angle. And as a result of that, we would call that plantar flexion, at least partially. That makes the gastrocnemius the agonist and the tibialis anterior the antagonist. So it's really useful in order to be able to consider those kinds of movements. Other pairs you might want to just be generally aware of that I have put on the screen here. At the shoulder, we've got the deltoid plus the latissimus dorsi. Okay, so let me try and spell it correctly. Latissimus dorsi, they act as a pair. Generally speaking, there's a couple of exceptions, but generally speaking, the deltoid will act as an abductor, the latissimus dorsi as an adductor, and I think outside of that, I think that's the only one I haven't sort of put as imagery on the screen. So those are our muscle pairs and something we should be aware of. Now, I'm going to go straight onto the respiratory system. I'm just going to take the briefest of pauses to sip my drink and just blow my nose a little bit. Straight back to you. So let's do some soft tissues after all of that study of those rock solid bones and skeletal feature, etc. We've done a bit of muscles as well, haven't we? Anyway, structure of the respiratory system. I'm just going to allow you to have a think about this and study it. The only thing I would just maybe make a detail of is we tend to just call nasal cavity the nose, so that makes things easier. But just to make sure you're happy with that. The only other thing I would sort of identify here is that the bronchus and the alveolus here are named as the singular and the bronchioles as the plural. I'll come back to that point in a second. So just look out for that. We've used a bit of a mix of singular and plural terms there. So what are we talking about with this structure? Well, first of all, the first part of this is we've got that mouth and nose or nasal cavity. Okay, so what are we talking here? We are talking about an entry and exit point from the actual system. So air enters to begin with and leaves finally via the mouth and the nose. Okay, so that's clear. Ultimately, air is being pushed out of here and being sucked into here, and therefore we've got our entry exit points there. Secondly, our trachea, okay, or a trachea, you might want to say. This is made up of cartilage, okay? Now, it's a specific kind of cartilage, but we have got cartilage rings. Now, this trachea is very close to the surface of the body here, especially around this bit. So we've got these rings of cartilage, very tough, very robust, and there is no gas exchange possible in those locations because it's this tough fibrous structure, and it's there at least partially for protection and robustness. Now the bronchi, now just to notice, this is the plural of the term. The bronchi, they're there effectively to separate or split the air into left and right channels or branches. So let's just have a look at that. Air comes down through into the trachea, and at this point here, it branches either to the right or to the left, and it is the bronchi that do that. Each one bronchus either takes it left or right. And again, these are quite robust, thick structures, okay? They're quite large, and they do that work there. Next, we have got our bronchioles. These sub-branches off the bronchi, they ultimately lead to the alveoli, and I'm going to come back to obviously alveoli in a second. So those alveoli are the destination for this air. The bronchioles are what lie between the large bronchi and these tiny little alveoli. Now these alveoli themselves, and obviously we've got them depicted up here. We've got these little alveoli, that's the wrong colour. We've got these little alveoli here, 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 here. They're sort of in the deep lung, so tiny that we can't see them. So a couple of things about them that we really want to be aware of. They are one cell thick. Now you big biology lovers, you'll know these are epithelial cells. I'm not going to get into that, but they are literally one cell thick. Therefore, they're capable of diffusion, and they allow diffusion, they allow a movement of gases across their membrane. But also, they are the site of gaseous exchange, or by all means say diffusion there. It's absolutely reasonable to do that. Now, the diaphragm, which we've also is the diaphragm which we've got pictured here, is also part of our system, and it's a muscular structure. So remember, everything we've talked about before has no mechanics to it. Okay, well, actually, that's not quite true. There's small muscles around the trachea, but anyway. So this muscle has to be at least one of the factors that provides force and movement here, because the lungs just follow. The bronchioles just follow. The trachea just sits there. The mouth, okay, you can sort of open and close it and all that kind of stuff, but there's no real mechanics there. So the thing that creates movement, and when I talk about movement, by the way, I'm talking about air in and air out. The thing that creates movement is muscle, and one of those muscles that does that is the diaphragm. So what does it do? Well, when we're inhaling, breathing in, very simply put, is it contracts, as do a couple of other muscles, by the way. And as we breathe out, as we exhale, it relaxes. And I just want to make a little detail here. When this muscle contracts here, folks, it doesn't sort of just do it basically. It sort of flattens out and comes to the bottom of the cavity. Now look now how big that space is for those lungs to be sort of pulled and expanded by. And then when it relaxes, it goes back into its dome shape like here. So we're talking here during contraction. I'm exaggerating, it's not as flat as that. And we're talking about here during relaxation. In other words, it expands and contracts, expands and restricts the size of that chest cavity, allowing air to rush in as a result of that. So those are really nice terms for you to get into your answers. One more section before I'm going to take another little break, because I've got sneezing issues today, which is great timing. So aerobic and anaerobic exercise, folks. I'm going to go through some basics here, and I just want to get some intuition into you as well, and also link this to your biology study, which, whilst it might not seem that relevant to the teachers who might be taking this, for you students who are going to sit biology MP exams, it's quite useful to know how these things compare. So I'm going to give you a little bit of information on that. However, first things first, let's look at the aerobic system, aerobic respiration. Remember, respiration, energy release. Aerobic, in the presence of sufficient oxygen. Respiration over here, energy release. Anaerobic, in the presence of insufficient or a lack of oxygen. Okay, so just remember those terms. So let's look at aerobic first of all. First of all, we know that this is a long duration system. Another great word to use here is it's sustainable. It can keep going and going and going and going. However, so there's our big positive. However, we do it in red. Our big negative is that it's low, or I prefer the term moderate actually, intensity. So think about your marathon runner, your open water swimmer skier, your triathlete Kate, the whole of Tom's tennis match, the whole of Julie's netball match. This is long duration, low intensity energy release. Now, how does it work? First of all, we have our fuel source of glucose, which is ultimately oxidized in the presence of oxygen. These are our biology term coming up, reactants, okay? These work together, and in combination, they release as products carbon dioxide gas and water, which can actually be removed in a couple of ways, including breathed out as water vapor. But in that process of breaking our reactants into products, we get the release of energy, okay? And that energy now can go and be used for long duration, low intensity exercise, such as a 5-hour marathon, such as an open water swim, such as a race walk. That is what is going on here, okay? Now, anaerobic respiration works differently. First of all, its strength is that it does high intensity energy release. Sorry, I'll just leave that point a second. I want to make a point here. This release of energy, same down here by the way, but this release of energy, what is that energy going to go and do in our context? It's going to now be transferred, you guys know in physics, to the kinetic energy store, but it's going to be transferred and power movement, okay? Such as our actual running action. That's what we are talking about here, folks. Now, let me go back to our anaerobic. We're saying it's high intensity in terms of the energy release, but there is a negative, folks. It is short duration. If you want to know how short, if we were doing A-level here, we'd be saying a maximum of 3 minutes, but typically around about a minute, sometimes less, okay? So what are we talking about? Our reactant is singular. We have the absence of oxygen. We have glucose. That is converted into actually the useful product, lactic acid, which you know is also fatiguing, but it's actually still lots of energy in it. It's fatiguing. That's our product. And in that process, we get the release. Of energy. Now the issue with this is, as I said, this energy release is not sustainable. It will exhaust. But of course, we're going to be doing this for our javelin throw. We're going to be doing this predominantly for our tennis serve. We're going to be doing this predominantly for our 100-meter sprint. Our Josh as our example up at the top. Now, can I stress to you, and this is a point that is often got wrong by students, is that this plus this are happening at all times. Okay, so as you sit there now, even taking this, probably sat down taking this session, you are doing anaerobic work, even though it's very low intensity at the moment. It's about which one's dominant and doing more of the energy release. Secondly, folks, I really, even though it might feel wasteful in a revision session, I want to get this point across to you. I'm just going to do this with aerobic. Remember what we had as our reactants. We had glucose, and we had that plus oxygen, okay? And we normally, what you'd expect me to be doing is sort of like doing an arrow like this, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do an arrow like this. Those react and they release, I'll put, say, water and carbon dioxide. Sorry, I'm mixing up. I should be writing this out. Bad technique, but anyway. But as that happens, folks, why have I done that drop? Well, it's because this is in a high energy state and this is in a low energy state. In other words, we have released energy from here. That energy can go off to power movement. It's aerobics, let's say a marathon run. But now that energy has been released and can go and be used. That is a better intuition of how this actually happens. So that is something I would just want you to picture in your mind, because that energy is now utilizable. It can be used, in this case, for movement. So I just want to share that with you. And you PE teachers out there, you'll notice I've used the terms reactants and products, not because that's necessarily going to get them marks in a PE exam. I'm relating it to their studies so they can borrow, I suppose, their biology study and come and be better students in PE as a result of that. Okay, I need to change my canvas 1 second. Okay, fantastic. Now I'm going to focus now on long-term effects of exercise. Can I stress to you, there's also the short-term effects, of course. Do have a close look at that. We've got whole tutorials on it, but we're going to focus on long-term effects. A nice way to think about this is that these are changes that remain, okay? And what I mean by that is that these are adaptations that happen as a result of weeks, months, and years of training, okay? Our body adaptations. Our body goes through these changes. If I could spell, that'd be dangerous. I don't even know what I've written. Let me do that again. Adaptations. There we go. Better. So these are long-term physiological changes as a result of training. Now, the first thing I want to point out to you is notice that I've separated them into musculoskeletal, respiratory, and cardiovascular. It's quite possible you would be asked only about cardiovascular, for example. So I'm just going to run through these. Musculoskeletal, first of all, we get muscle hypertrophy. Just notice what that word hypertrophy means. It means thickening, engorging, largening. That's what we mean by that. So of course, the muscles are going to get, in essence, bigger. Obviously leads to sort of strength. We're going to come back to that. But the thing is, why is it getting bigger? There's a couple of things. The main one is it's storing more materials, storing more resources. Anyway, we get increased strength of ligaments and tendons, so our soft tissues become more robust. Our tendons, for example, can apply more force directly. Our bones, remember those long bones that operate as levers or lever arms, okay, they become denser, so they can have more force applied to them. Brilliant. And we recover faster. Musculoskeletal in that sense. Now, I've said little asterisks here because I don't necessarily see that as a musculoskeletal adaptations, but it's where we sort of sit on this course, so we'll go with that. Now, respiratory, a couple of things. We get an increased lung capacity. Now, this is in some ways a bit misleading. What happens here is this one, stronger respiratory muscles, cause a greater functional lung capacity. And what I mean by that is because the muscles of, for example, the diaphragm can contract much harder and faster, what that means is the accessible lung becomes greater, and therefore lung capacity in its functional sense or its practical sense becomes greater. We also get an increased number of alveoli, but I want to make this point again, because the muscles themselves get stronger and they pull in more air to the deeper part of the lung, more alveoli, the deeper alveoli are actually accessed, so it's a nice way. Now, this one, if you think about this in totality, we get more oxygen in, we get more CO2 out, we get greater diffusion, greater rate of diffusion. But what that means is that we can work at higher intensity of exercise aerobically, and we don't fatigue as quickly. So it's really important. And then final grouping, cardiovascular, heart, the blood vessels, the blood. What we're talking about here is that our stroke volume goes up at rest. Okay, so because in essence, because we are able to, we'll come to these points, because we've got a stronger heart muscle, also because we're returning more blood to the heart, stroke volume will go up at rest. As a result of that, we also get a decreased resting heart rate. Why? Because if we remember that our cardiac output equals our stroke volume times heart rate, okay, I'm mixing up my terms, but if we remember that first of all, at rest, this remains the same. Okay, so if at rest our stroke volume is greater, our heart rate can be lower. Lovely. So greater stroke volume rest, lower heart rate rest. But once we start exercising, because our stroke volume is greater, we've obviously now got a greater range of heart rates when we exercise. Our maximum cardiac output now goes up because we can put this up higher, and this, although it can't go higher, has now got a greater range of beats available to it. The size and the strength of the heart are greater. We could use the word hypertrophy there as well. We get more capillaries around places like the alveoli, also around the muscle as well. So what does that mean? We get greater gaseous exchange, greater oxygen in, greater CO2 out. We can work at higher intensities aerobically. Kate, our triathlete, she can actually work at a higher pace. And she won't go into that sort of anaerobic fatigue at that point. We get more red blood cells, which of course is for oxygen transportation, therefore greater delivery, and we get a decreased resting blood pressure. So the actual blood vessels put up less resistance. They're actually able to dilate and open more. So that's obviously a strength as well. Those are our long-term effects of exercise, folks. Now, we're going big here. We're going into levers, okay? So big things we want to do. We're really interested in our identification of systems. So remember, I'll tell you, remember that a lever has to have 4 things to be a lever, okay? So it has to have, number 1, it has to have a lever arm. Now you already know that that is a long bone. It needs to have a fulcrum in the human body. These are joints. It needs to have, number 3, an effort. Now we know, again, this is the muscles attaching to the bone and pulling on them. And it needs to have, number 4, it needs to have a load or a resistance. Now I'm just going to assume you guys are aware of that, obviously just filling you in. And we're straight away going to go into the classification of levers. Now, not surprisingly, we're going to start talking about first class levers here. Okay, and I've given you 2 examples right here. They are first class. Why? Because the fulcrum, the F, is between. I'm not going to go any further with that. The fulcrum is between. Notice, not in the middle, between. So look at our neck extension. This is our atlas and axis, of course. The neck is sort of pulling back, as I said before, looking up to spot the volleyball here. The fulcrum is there. This is the atlas and axis joint. The effort is the muscles pulling of the neck down on the back of the cranium. And our load, which would be acting downwards, of course, is actually the weight of the head. So the fulcrum is between the effort and the load. Therefore, this is a first-class lever. We have the equivalent scenario with elbow extension. Let me be clear. This is extension. Elbow extension. I just realised I didn't clarify what I was lying about earlier. I wonder if I can do that once I come back and speak to Marta in the chat. But anyway, let's talk about extension. This one's more complex because we have the fulcrum of the elbow, lovely. We have the weight or the load or the resistance of the arm and the racket. But crucially, we have the tricep muscle here, which is pulling on this point of the elbow here. Okay, it's pulling on, it's actually called the olecranon. I'm not going into that. It's the absolute end of the ulna. And therefore, it's just outside the fulcrum, making the fulcrum between the effort and the load, albeit very, very close to the effort. Therefore, it is a first-class lever during elbow extension. Think about throwing something, hitting something, punching in boxing or MMA or whatever. That is what we're talking about there. Next ones, we have now our second class levers. So these are our second one. It is our second class lever. And the key thing to be aware of the second class is we have our L between, our L in the central location. So let's think about something like plantar flexion of the ankle. Let's imagine I'm doing a takeoff in a long jump, or this is our sprinter Josh pushing as he strikes the ground with his ball of the foot. So what have we got here? Well, the fulcrum itself is the ball of the foot and its contact with the floor. The effort is the contraction of the gastrocnemius, which is pulling on the heel bone. And the weight or the load of the body is acting down here. So this is actually acting downwards, okay? So what do we have here? We have the load between the fulcrum and the effort. Therefore, this is a second class lever. Now, I'm just going to quickly mention the term here, mechanical advantage. We want to come back to it. But this lever has mechanical advantage. And the reason it has mechanical advantage is because this distance here, we would actually call it the effort arm, is longer than this distance here. And I'm going to come back to that point in a second. Now then, I think I am at least, yeah, I am. Okay, now we're now interested in our third class levers. Okay, I'll write it over here. Third class, what we have now is we have, not surprisingly, effort between. Okay, so effort is the central or the between component. So what do we have in our bicep curl, or we just call it our elbow flexion, let's say? Well, we have the fulcrum of the elbow, thankfully. We have the bicep muscle here, which is inserting down actually onto the radius, interestingly, and pulling obviously in that direction. And then we have the weight of the dumbbell, which is the component between the others. The effort is between the fulcrum and the load. Therefore, it is a third class lever. We could also look at something like knee flexion. Notice here the weight of the leg. The knee joint is the fulcrum. And here we've got the hamstrings, which attach here to the back of our lower leg and, of course, pull the leg in this way. The effort is between the fulcrum and the load. Therefore, it is a third class lever. Now, I mentioned mechanical advantage, so let's get on to that. The key point I want to stress here to you is that mechanical advantage can be described as, or defined as, effort arm divided by load arm. So, folks, this here is the effort arm. It's the horizontal distance or between the effort and the fulcrum. Now, if that is large and what we call our load arm is shorter, and this is all relative, of course, then we achieve mechanical advantage. Now, what does mechanical advantage do? It does the following. It's brilliant for overcoming large loads. Hey, what a shock that we have got a second class lever with mechanical advantage at the heel, which is probably the most weight-bearing joint in the body. Very interesting. It overcomes these large loads with relatively little effort, so we can do lots of work, even though it doesn't feel like a huge effort. It's really efficient in that sense. However, it's got a couple of negatives. It has a down sad face. It has a short range of motion, so it's not a very flexible joint. It doesn't go very far. And then finally, it has what you might call limited or low speed of movement. So what you find with mechanical advantage is it's big and robust and strong, and it does this sort of weighty business. But when it comes to the more kind of floaty stuff like being flexible and being fast, it ain't so good. Okay, so that's what we mean by mechanical advantage. So is it an advantage? Well, it depends what you got to do. At the ankle, it's an advantage because you've got to lift the body weight. Elsewhere, you might need more speed and flexibility, hence it not being present in others. Now, before we stop for a break, I'm going to talk about components of fitness, okay? I cannot stress to you the relative importance of this within your preparation for your exam, okay? So a couple of things. I am going to just assume that you can remember the components of fitness and learn the definitions. There's no good me just telling you the definitions now. You need to learn them, so flipping heck learn them, okay? What I want you folks to consider doing is taking each component of fitness and applying it differently to Laura, Josh, Julie, Tom and Kate, and doing so in the space I provide. And I'll do one or a couple here for you, and we'll have a go at it and see what we come up with. But the point is, we want to use what I call the EIO model. When we talk about EIO model, we're going to take our example, and I've written extensively about this, especially teachers in the blog if you want to go and have a look. We're going to talk about the impact of that example, and then what that causes is the outcome. So let's just look at Julie's. Julie had, for agility, she has the ability to dodge an opponent netball to get, so there's the example, dodge an opponent. The get free is the impact, and the outcome is she receives the pass. Can you see how I've taken that particular one and I've said, right, this is why it's relevant. Now let's do a really hard one. Let's do agility for Josh. Okay, now Josh doesn't use a lot of agility because he's a straight line sprinter. He doesn't do a lot of change in directions. So we're going to say ability to get to the feet, which is a change in direction, of course, from, I'll just put sprint start position there, SS, quickly and controlled. So he accelerates rapidly and leads the race after 15 meters. Okay, so that's my sprint to Josh, remember? So I've said the example is the sprint start, getting from the sprint start up into the running position. The impact is that he accelerates rapidly, and the outcome is that he's in front of the race after 15 meters. Does he win? It depends how fast he is, isn't it? But the point is, I'm using that example. So can I urge you folks now to go through those and spend time? I'll just give you one other example here. We've got Laura, who's our gymnast, of course. We've got coordination here, the ability to use different body parts together. Laura, ability to perform a split leap with a wide range of motion at the hip. Now, do you notice there, we've got our E and we've got our R, we've got our I, but we haven't got the outcome. So what would our outcome be here? Let's add it in. So that, or thus, she scores higher for difficulty. Okay, I don't know if that's actually true what I just wrote. Gymnast's probably swearing at me, but equivalent things. Okay, so that's the point, and I've given you space to be able to do all of that. Now I'll leave you guys to to get on with that, but this is where I want to take this from here. We need to also be able to justify or explain why certain component of fitness are important or not important in certain performances. So I've given you a base question, and I'm not saying it will be written like this in your exam. It might be something around the same sort of principle, but we're saying to you over and over again, do answers which are justify the importance of. Let's go for strength. To and let's say a tennis player. Okay. You can do that over and over again. Look, I've got here, justify the importance of speed to a marathon, justify the importance of flexibility to a hockey goalkeeper. Keep going with that principle and prepare yourselves to do what I'm going to show you here, because the thing I want you to be considering is that this is probably going to be an AO3 type response. So what I want you to notice is that in my answer for strength and sprinting here and justifying the role of strength and sprinting, notice there are no marks for definition, okay? All the marks are coming from here, me actually saying what the outcome is, or you could say the impact. So maximal strength causes large amounts of force to be applied to the block to cause an explosive start impact. It also allows the sprinter to apply more force to the ground when striding, which propels the sprinter forward faster. Finally, maximal strength in the arms and shoulders allow the sprinter to pump their arms, causing greater forward motion. And if we wanted to go a bit further and relook at the outcome, so they run the fastest time possible. And you could say, win the race, podium, whatever. So there we are taking our example and we're saying, why is this important? Now I want you to do that again and again and again and again, and I want you to get good at that. Teachers, please spend time with your students going over that principle. We're in a 1 hour session here with whatever 14 topics to do. I could do every single one of them, but if we get that back into our classrooms and we get people working on that, can we guarantee it, Marks? No, of course we can't. But is that a crucial and fundamental skill? Might that come up in your 9 marker? Might that be really relevant to questions leading up to the 9 marker? Who knows? But that is a fundamental skill, folks, and I've put those resources there particularly so that you can prepare that fundamental skill. Teachers, I don't know how to say this without it feeling a little bit kind of, can I also stress, in classrooms, these are the only resource styles that I work with in this particular unit, for example. That as a resource to actually develop components of fitness, in my opinion, is more relevant than something, I feel bad comparing, but to a bunch of slides that, here's the definition, here's this one, it relates to hockey. This is the skill that we need to actually develop in these areas. I hope that comes across reasonably. Okay, let's move things on. Fitness test. Now, first things first, folks. When we talk about fitness tests, we are interested in their protocols, how you do them, and how they link to the components of fitness, which we've just had a look at, right? So let's go through these, and I'm not going to dwell on every point again. I can basically tell you guys you have to learn these. But folks, please address the following. We've got our definition of CV fitness, ability to exercise the entire body for long periods of time without tiring. There's my example with my EIO method. Again, if you're unsure about that method, I've written about it extensively online. But the point I want to make is we must know our protocol. Okay, our protocol is what we want to be looking at here. So 12-minute Cooper run, we run for 12 minutes around a designated course, we play cones 50 meters apart, we measure the distance you cover and calculate V2, we compare results. Now, a couple of other things we should say is that our course should be an exact distance. Okay, now that's great if you use them like a running track, but we can't just sort of estimate round this football pitch or rugby pitch, it's 282 meters. No, we have to measure that so that we can then get an accurate reading. Harvard step test. How do we do this? Performers step up and down a specific height bench. We do that for 5 minutes exactly. There's one step every 2 seconds. I'm sure you've had a go at this. And when finished, we take your heart rate. We take it again after 2 and 3 minutes, and we plot a graph to compare the recovery of heart rate from that exercise. That is our protocol, folks, and you need to get that sort of learned and understood. Now, I don't think I'm going to go through all of them here, but that is where we want to go with this. So I'm just going to pause. And I'll be straight back to you. Thanks for being patient with me, folks. I'm a sneezy boy. Now, I'm going to assume you can study the Illinois agility test and you can tell me the protocol. Okay, where I'm going to go with it is doing positives and negatives. So I'm going to evaluate this thing, or I might be asked to do this in a discussion or to justify it for a particular performer. So look, one of the strengths is it's very good as a measure of agility for running-based performers. Fantastic. Isn't that nice? Secondly, that's a positive. It's a small space, so it's really quite practical. But this has got problems in this test. First of all, we often get coordination issues. Basically, people do the test and they follow the wrong track, and it takes them a little while to sort of remember which way round. And by that point, you're sort of not necessarily getting the best time. It's sort of overly cognitive. But other things is it's not good for racket sports. Now, you might want to think, well, what do you mean by that? Well, rackets, think about something like table tennis. Table tennis is a very sort of side-by-side, crabby type action. And this test doesn't really measure that. It's a lot of forward action with small amounts of side-to-side movement. So we're better with something like a hexagon test. I'm not going to get into the details of what that is, but that might be better. So we need to be able to evaluate and say why this is relevant and not relevant. Let's take this further. We've got here our strength test. We've got hand grip dynamometer test. Now, again, I'm not going to go into the details of this, but we can say that it's quick, that it's simple. Okay, so this is all practical stuff. You can do lots of tests. Okay, so that's absolutely fine. So, you can you've probably done it yourselves. You get everyone in the class done in a sort of 20-minute period or something like that. So those are all really practical issues. But we can say here it only measures forearm strength. Okay, so it only measures forearm strength. And what we mean by that is that only measures forearm strength. So if we consider this to be a test of leg strength, for example, we can't claim it's that, right? Now, will there be a relationship between forearm strength and leg strength? Probably, but it certainly doesn't test that. And we can say overall it is not valid. And what we mean by that is it's not a valid test to talk about whole body, not valid whole body. Okay, so you might be interested to know, there are dynamometer tests for other parts of the body as a result of that. So there's our evaluation. And I think we've got 2 more here before we have to change canvas. Let's look at our muscular endurance test. We've got the press up and sit up test. They're 1-minute tests. Obviously, we count them for as many time, do as many as we can in that period of time, and we count them. So the positives of this, again, quite practical, simple, really good for groups or lots of people. Limited equipment. Okay, so not surprisingly, this gets done in schools, right? Because you can kind of get it done in schools. However, there are negatives to this. It is technique, that's meant to be read. It is technique based. And often people will struggle with the base technique. Secondly, we can describe it as maximal. It's not a particularly pleasant experience, and people struggle with motivation issues as a result of that. And finally, we could sort of say that its reliability is low. Okay, its reliability is low because we've got issues of counting and da-da-da. But the final negative I'd say here, it doesn't measure whole body. Now, interestingly, if you take something like the sit-up test, for example, I've found with experience with this that it works really well, and I think people like gymnasts do really well on it. But people with other types of kind of muscular endurance in other parts of the body, let's say footballers, they struggle on it because it's measuring that sort of like particularly the abdominals and hip flexors, and therefore we might say it's not the most valid. Last one before we change canvas, we're looking at a speed test. The 30-metre sprint test, which you probably realise is the rolling start. We accelerate before the line. Typically, people get between 3 and 5.5 seconds, something like that. So what do we have here? Again, it's quite a simple test. It's really good for runners. Okay, so if we want to measure the speed of runners, that works really, really well for those individuals. But there are some negatives, right? You're already going to know what they are. First of all, it's maximal. Okay, it has a relatively large space. So obviously, you've got the 30 metres of sprinting. You've got probably another 30 metres of acceleration time. And it's no good for non-runners to measure speed of non-runners. Why would you use this, for example, for a cyclist? Doesn't make sense, right? So we've got evaluations in that sense. Okay, I need to change the canvas and I'll be straight back to you with a couple more fitness tests. So let's plow through these fitness tests. We're very new there, folks. Positives of our vertical jump test. It's really good for leg power. Okay, so for measuring leg power, you know, it's absolutely superb for that. Secondly, it's quite a simple test, you know, especially if you're not using the equipment for it, using a bit of chalk and a ruler. You know, it's fairly straightforward to actually go about doing this. But there are some negatives. It's not whole body, so therefore there's a lack of validity there. So it's measuring leg and I suppose some arm power specifically. But the other thing here is we get measurement inaccuracies, measurement errors, you know, like especially if we're using chalk or chalked fingers. You've got the situation where you've got to sort of make the line at the peak. You've got then to measure. You've got to get up on a step ladder or something and measure with a meter rule. You know, the chances of getting this exactly right are probably quite slim. So there's a couple of issues there with that test. And to finish off with here, folks, we want to be also evaluating our sit and reach test. And again, I'm sure this is a test you know quite well. So positives, simple, excellent for measuring lower back and hamstring, and excellent for measuring what we might call static flexibility. But that, of course, leads to some negatives here, right? So the negative, first of all, I'll jump on that one straight away. It does not measure dynamic flexibility. So any flexibility which is shown during movement is not tested by this particular mechanism. Okay, so it's not much use to that. Secondly, it's not whole body. You know, we've said a bit above, it's great for the lower back and legs, but it's not whole body. So therefore, applying it to the whole body maybe is not applicable. And I suppose we could say one person at a time. Okay, one person at a time. Okay, so it's not the most practical. It takes a little while. I mean, you could say that about a few of these tests, to be fair, and feel free to throw that in if you want to. But what we have done is we've given strengths and weaknesses evaluations. Now, what you should be considering is how do these relate to the performers? Maybe the 6 performers I've given you as performance profiles. You may well be asked a question as, you know, justify the use of this or evaluate whether this is relevant, this test is relevant for this performer, etc. Okay, training methods, absolutely massive. Why? Because we are once again interested in the evaluation skill. Now, we know your 9 marker is going to be evaluate, don't we? So therefore, let's get good at evaluating. Now, continuous training, yes, it's running, cycling, swimming. Yes, it's heart rate between 60 and 80% maximum heart rate. Yes, it's for cardiovascular fitness. Yes, it's a sustained period of time, typically more than 20 minutes. You guys can figure that stuff out. Where I want to go with it is look at its positives and negatives. It's very accessible, making it practical. It's cheap, making it practical. And also, we can monitor duration very easy through a stopwatch and intensity. Go back to our aerobic work earlier, and the fact we're saying between 60 and 80% heart rate for a minimum of 20 minutes. We can measure these things very specifically through continuous training because they're measurable and we can access that information. But there are negatives. Let's be clear, people don't love this training method, and especially young people. One thing is that it is argued that speed is reduced through continuous training. So speed and power, these sort of more explosive anaerobic mechanisms, maybe they're not as beneficial here. And it can lead to overuse of chronic injuries, things like stress fractures. You know, if you're running many, many miles a day, it's quite likely that you have problems with, say, shins. And it takes time. It's a big old chunk. Now, it takes time when you go out for a run. What about something like road cycling when you have to get all the gear on and lube your bike, etc., and get yourself out there? You know, there are practical issues. Fartlek training is a form of continuous. Notice, furthermore, it's varying intensities, it's varying incline, varying speed, varying terrain. That's what we're talking about with fartlek training. Why is it great? People prefer it to continuous. It does develop speed and power. It reflects gameplay because, of course, you get changing intensity in gameplay, and it's great for cross-country runners because of that sort of changing terrain as well, and changing intensity, lots of cross-country's got incline, decline. However, there are weaknesses. It needs more space or more, so it's not as easy to get out your front door and go and do this. You need certain areas to be able to do this. And notice the intensity is hard to monitor because, heart rate doesn't go from 60 to 80 to 85% like that quickly. It takes time, right? So you don't know if you're working at exactly the right intensity. You're effectively estimating it, unlike with continuous where you can do it specifically. Okay, circuit training. We know generally for muscular endurance and strength, obviously there are variations to that, it's based on a work-rest ratio. So we work for a period of time, we rest for a period of time. Sometimes that rest is active, running around the circuit or something. And it's a series of stations which are sort of preordained and organised. Brilliant. Now, there are loads of strengths to this one. We can adapt it endlessly. We can work on the whole body. We can vary the order of the stations. We can train muscular endurance, strength, and even CV fitness at times. It's brilliant use of space. This is why it's used for wet weather lessons a lot of the time in PE departments. And it's got different levels of fitness can work together. Now, that's actually an interesting point, that last one. If you're in a class, say, and let's say it's a wet weather lesson, different people can be doing, bicep curls, and you'll be lifting different weights. You might have some beefcake and someone who's not as strong, and obviously, you can work for the same period of time, but with different intensities. Well, it would be the same intensity, but you get my point. So, different people can work together in the same space. However, there are no records of what people did. It's hard to monitor for the trainer and the coach, and there can be loafing or demotivation. I'm sure you've never seen that yourselves, but it is possible. Plyometric training, one of my favourites. How does this work? It's a concentric contraction which is preceded by an eccentric. And if you're not sure what that is, don't worry. Basically, it means we lengthen the muscle under tension, and then we quickly shorten the muscle under tension. It causes an increase in power. Excellent upper body examples, and put these into your answer, are press-up claps, medicine ball work. Lower body, we could be talking bounding, depth jumping, and it's often in a circuit training format. Now, why is this great? It's brilliant for power. It's considered modern, and people sort of find it engaging and non-tedious and interesting. However, it's only suitable for, air quotes, athletes, people who are already fit. Okay, we want to be careful with plyometrics for, let's say, the elderly, for example, me. And it can cause more harm than good for some individuals. So it is a very high intensity workout, and therefore we need to be a little bit cautious. Now, talk about high intensity workout. Let's look at interval and then HIIT. So with regard to interval training, we're talking about structured into sets and reps and recovery times. Can I stress to you, sets and reps and recovery times? These are all time from fit. Okay, so if people get this wrong all the time, if we say more reps, more sets, fewer reps, fewer sets, we are adjusting time, not intensity. I keep having to say that one. It's based on work relief ratio. The intensity can be altered to meet specific fitness aims. That would be the pace or the actual how fast, in this case, we run. And it's periods of high intensity exercise followed by periods of low intensity exercise. Now, typically we would say rest for that, okay? Now, what are the positives? It's brilliant for speed and power. It's very simple. And it's great for developing the anaerobic energy systems and the aerobic. And notice here, anaerobic is developed during the work. Aerobic is our recovery system. So, of course, if we really structure and time those recovery periods, that's going to be really emphasizing that aerobic work as well. It requires motivation, and we don't completely know what the intensity is easily. We often have to estimate it. Now, I think we're getting there. Weight training is our last one. Lots of information here, hugely variable process, of course. So, we can do things differently based on our fitness aim. We've got recovery sessions, recovery periods are closely measured. This is something I see wrong in the gym all the time. People will lift some absolute weights, but they'll sort of just sit there for a while on their phone. No, your recovery should be tight. Honestly, number of people I've wanted to go and have a website. Excuse me, have you ever considered doing this properly? Anyway, I'm never going to do that because it would be weird, wouldn't it? But you take my point. The recovery period is important. I sort of feel like I'm speaking to a lot of the boys here. So sexist what I just said, but you know what I mean? Like, yeah, lift heavyweight, lift heavyweight, lift heavyweight, get on my phone, sit there a bit, feel like doing some more. No, time the recovery if you want to get strong. Anyway, I'll stop. The time from fit is important. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Now, strength, power, and muscular endurance variations. Okay, that's important. Now, I'll just go over here. Strength will tend to do greater than 85% of 1 rep max, up to 6 reps, 3 to 6 sets. Whereas muscular endurance, just over 6% of 1 rep max, up to 21 reps, 2 to 4 sets. So we've got differences. Can I also just say up here, we want to be mentioning safety in our answers. We've got things like spotters, we've got things like technique. I mentioned lifting 2 heavy weights. Lots of people make this error and forget this and this, so that's important. Now, evaluation. I've already touched on some of these. Brilliant for strength and muscle endurance. Never-ending variations. We can isolate muscles, brilliant. However, lots of people use poor technique, and it does require equipment, so there's this exclusivity to that. Okay, so therefore, sometimes it requires a gym member. I don't suppose it does ultimately, but you need to be able to access that. Okay, I'm just going to pause just for a sneeze and a drink of water, and I'll be straight back to you folks. Okay, we are getting there. Section 11 already, folks. 11 sections of the course. And what have we done? 40 odd minutes? I'm not even sure. Now then, let's have a look at this PARQ, this physical activity readiness questionnaire. Can I stress to you, and feel free to actually fill it in for yourself, this is a health screen. Okay, we're screening for health, not for lifestyle, for health. Okay, and the reason that people generally do a PARQ before they train, or a gym or a fitness center, is because they typically want to say, yep, go ahead, you're fine. Sometimes they will make what's called a GP referral. They want a doctor to say, yep, this person's fine to go in the gym and train, and this will be a sort of a precursor to that. But it's called a physical activity readiness questionnaire. Get it into your answers, folks. It's a health screen. Now, we are now going to look at injury prevention. Lots that we could look at here, but these are the core principles. Going to stress again, it's very likely that you're going to be applying these to an example. So, for example, I'll actually do that as we go through. So let's use, which athlete should we use? Let's use Tom. He's our recreational tennis player, right? He must follow the principles of training. So he mustn't overtrain, for example. He mustn't get so excited about his tennis that he trains every day and goes and gives himself tennis elbow, right? We need to use that kind of moderation, reversibility type principle in here. He must follow the rules, okay? That adherence to rules is going to be things such as, well, what am I going to use for Tom? I said that before I actually got an answer in my head. What would Tom do for adherence to the rules? He would wear... I'm not going to talk about kit, that's going to come back. He would do things such as he would... I can't think of any. Figure one out, I'm so sorry. PPE, not really that important, but he would be wearing, for example, ankle-supported shoes, ankle-supported trainers. He would be using footwear that doesn't cause him to slip, for example. He would check his equipment, especially things like the grip on the racket. Is it going to cause him blisters? And he would check his facility. Is there any debris on the court? Is the court wet? Are there puddles? Is there ice? Is he likely to fall? I mean, you could even say things like net height here, although it's not a particular safety factor. But even in a marginal way, net height, if the net was lower, for example, people can hit the ball harder. And I suppose technically it becomes a little bit less safe. Also, think about like fencing around the outside. That fencing is there for a reason, not just so the ball doesn't go flying away, so the ball doesn't hit other people, right? So we've got to check for that reason. I just can't come up with a safety injury prevention adherence to rules. I'm so sorry. Brain is not delivering it. Okay, and let's move into section 12. Let's look at PEDS. Now, lots to cover here, so let's just take our time. What we want to be doing here is we want to say who might take it, why might they take it, and what might be the side effect of this. So we're interested in anabolic steroid. Can I just remind you that anabolic steroid are a testosterone derivative, okay? So they contain either testosterone or equivalent chemicals that will have the same effect of testosterone. Of course, what that does is, in combination with training, is it develops lean muscles. Okay, so that's what it's for. So who would use this? Power athletes, sprinters, weightlifters. Josh, forgive me, I bet you've never been near one in your life, our little performer example, but Josh, our sprinter, might be tempted, unlike maybe Kate, our triathlete, who's less likely to be, because this is not as relevant to her. What does it do? All the positives. Increased muscle mass, fantastic. Increased power, wow. Increased strength, fast recovery. Some people even say fast recovery from injury as well. However, we've got all these negatives. Roid rage, which is change in personality. Androgynous changes. Now, you can pick your own here. Androgynous means gender or sex changes. So we've got all kinds of things that we talk about here. Deformation of facial features, growth of hair. It does have impact on both male and female genitalia as well. And the reason it does this, folks, is that athletes take this stuff in massive doses. Please don't be scared. If you have to go to the doctor and receive a steroid for something the doctor recommends, I'm not a medic, so obviously listen to them, not me. But the point is, you are not taking the dosage of steroids that these athletes are taking enormous doses potentially. So therefore, we can get these things. Now, I feel a bit weird saying this, but it's argued that liver damage and heart failure. I've read about this quite a lot. This is not agreed, but it gets us marks in our exam, so I'm going to offer it to you. Now, beta blockers, they're a very different kind of structure, okay? So first of all, they effectively what they do is they suppress, let me choose a different color. They suppress the CNS, the central nervous system. So who's going to use these beta blockers? People who need to be calm, archers, pistol rifle shooters, snooker players. They want that steady hand. It reduces heart rate, it reduces tension, anxiety, and it produces a steady hand, as I said before. However, there are negatives. Slow, and we might feel a bit drowsy. I need a kip here, Sam. All right, so you might feel a little bit drowsy potentially. Again, can I just stress these are illegal? But interestingly, they're only illegal in some sports. For example, if you're a powerlifter, they don't stop you taking beta blockers because it doesn't help you. So it's only banned for some sports. So you wouldn't want to, I mean, it's quite a serious drug. Beta blockers as well, they're used for all kinds of other things in life. I'm not going to get into it here, but they're often used for anxiety disorders, all kinds of things. Anyway, I need to change my canvas. 1 second, please. Folks, we are officially in the home straight. The kettle is calling. Now then, let's talk about diuretics again. Diuretics are illegal in sport. They are, of course, a completely typical drug for all kinds of things that people do for health reasons, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about performance enhancement through doping. So what are we saying here? Typically, these diuretics, which is a flushing, removing of water drug, okay? People who need to make weight, okay? So nice term for you to get into your answers. Make weight. People who need to make weight, such as boxers, fighters, judo players, these may use diuretics because it flushes water out of their system. A jockey who needs to be light to get on a certain horse to meet a certain handicap. I don't know if you know much about horse racing, but they need to potentially be a certain weight as well. So what does it do? It causes water loss, rapid weight loss because of that. It's also used as a flushing agent, okay? It flushes the system of masks other drugs. So you'll often see diuretic being used after other performance-enhancing drug use. And of course, I mentioned make weight. Why is it negative? Dehydration, clearly, and the body can go into shock. I mean, I can think of numerous examples of this. There's some great documentaries around the UFC and MMA fighting around cutting weight and losing weight rapidly. It's quite remarkable what people do. So I'm not saying those people are taking diuretics. Hopefully they're not, but you know, the equivalent is considerable. Now, narcotic analgesics, a couple of things here. This is all about pain management. You know, you might be wondering, why is it all now in grey, James? Oh, that's because I messed up on my colours earlier. But pain management is what analgesics for. Why would someone, who would take it? Someone who's injured and someone who's awaiting an operation, someone who's going through something absolutely savage like an Ironman competition or extreme triathlon. Now, what's the positives? It dulls pain. You can keep playing through injuries. You can delay operations until post-season, something like that. Really useful, right? However, if you keep playing, you might make that thing worse. And of course, the athlete's health is not potentially being put first. So again, we're giving positives and negatives. Effectively, we're evaluating these. Can I just stress again that some pain killers are legal, but we're talking about narcotic analgesics. Unless they've got a TUE, a therapeutic use exemption, most narcotic analgesics are illegal in sport, okay, unless it's prescribed and agreed by WADA. Okay, peptide hormones, we're going to look at two. We're going to look at EPO, or erythropoietin, which is a really hard word to say, and we're going to look at HGH, which is human growth hormone, much easier. EPO first, the granddaddy of the 1990s and early 2000s drugs, especially in cycling. Who might take it? Our road cyclist, Armstrong and et al., triathlete, marathon runner, cross-country skier. And there was a lot of this taken by Russian cross-country skiers around the Sochi Olympics. You might want to read about that. Anyway, positives, it boosts red blood cell production. By the way, that process is actually called erythropoiesis, hence the name erythropoietin. Excuse me. Increases oxygen transportation. Therefore, what's the outcome of that? Or the impact? We can perform at higher intensity aerobically, and we won't become fatigued to a much greater pace. Brilliant. So we're going up a mountain on a road bike. We're not going to go into the red at a much higher intensity, much higher pace. However, blood viscosity, remember this means thickness or stickiness.
the blood becomes stickier and it leads to an increase in blood pressure. Can I stress again, it is completely illegal. Now, that was a problem because there wasn't a test for it for a long time, because this is naturally occurring in the human body. You actually have this knocking about in your bone marrow all day long. But nevertheless, I mean, I won't go into you biologists you might know how many red blood cells die and are created in a single second. It's insanity, and that is erythropoiesis. It's the same process. Anyway, peptide hormones, human growth hormone. Who might take this? Weightlifters. Someone's got to like deliver a large force to an object, basically. You know, put your shot putters in there if you want to. Deadlifters would love this stuff, right? Okay, so can I just re-stress? It is completely illegal in sport. But what might it do? It increases muscle mass. It makes us stronger and more powerful. However, it's really negative for our health. It can cause many more issues than this. I've actually read about the HH quite extensively. I'm not going to go into it here. Liver damage is where you're going to put your answer. We are nearly there, folks. 2 to go. Stimulants. I think 2 to go. Stimulants. Things like, folks, caffeine. You could be talking about amphetamine. Okay, why might someone be interested in it? By the way, this one's legal. This one's illegal. Okay, so just bear that one in mind. So why would someone, let's say, take caffeine? Well, people like games players for alertness, boxers for dodging, you know, that makes sense, doesn't it, right? It makes us alert, it improves or reduces our reaction time. We react faster, in essence. However, it can get us hyped. We can lose concentration. You can imagine a shaky person after 8 cups of coffee, trying to then go and do some kind of sport activity. I mean, I've been there. One other thing about caffeine specifically, by the way, is it's really good for endurance, and specifically it's good for fat solubility. So it actually has a chemical effect in the body as well. So people like marathon runners rely on caffeine a lot because it actually helps the fat be moved through the blood more efficiently. Anyway, that's just a little side point. We are in the last stage, blood doping. Can I just stress as well, we don't actually take blood doping, we do blood doping. I don't, but anyway, blood doping in essence is the removal of blood, the regrowth of that blood naturally in the body, and then the re-injection or retransfusion of that blood so that we've got greater blood volume and greater red blood cell count as a whole for that oxygen transport. Who might? Road cyclists, especially in the 90s, 2000s, did it a lot. Triathletes, marathon and cross-country skiers, the same people who might use EPO. By the way, when EPO was eventually testable and obviously banned, people weren't able to do that, especially in cycling. So what did they do instead? They did this. They were, okay, we can't do that one, we'll do this one. You ain't got a test for that, son. They do now. Anyway, so red blood, it's called the passport. I don't know if you've come across it. Anyway, red blood cell production increases. We get greater red blood cell production, obviously to replace the blood that's been taken out. Greater transportation of oxygen. Perform at higher intensities aerobically. Negative transfusion infections and high blood pressure are negatives. And guys, just to say the way this actually works is that blood would be removed, and this would be some weeks before competition. Then that blood would effectively regrow, erythropoiesis, we've mentioned it already, and then we would re-inject, often just the red blood cells, but that which has been taken out we re-inject. So now you've got a greater blood volume and a greater number of red blood cells to actually transport oxygen for that aerobic respiration work. And we are done, folks. What a session. I think I've gone over massively. If I have, I apologise if I haven't. I don't even know what time it is. Yeah, let's go back and have a quick chat.
Woo. Marta.
Hello.
Woo. That is nearly 3 hours of delivery this afternoon. How are we doing?
Yeah, good.
Comments, questions, shout outs, wonderful people out there.
Yes, I've got one question before we give any shout outs. What is the role of antagonistic muscles in movement, James?
Okay, I mean, good fundamental question. Who is that from, do you know?
I haven't got a name. It was from a student on chat.
Oh, thank you, student on chat. So yeah, when we're talking about skeletal movement, when we're talking about movement of things like long bones, when we're talking about moving limbs like arms, like legs, etc., 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 obviously, just to repeat the point I made before, really, a muscle, if you consider all a muscle can do is pull, okay, it cannot push anything, okay, so a muscle can pull, that's all it can do. So when whatever that thing is, let's say the elbow and the bones of the arm need to go in the other direction, you need a muscle to pull in the other direction because it can't be pushed, okay, it can be resisted but it can't be pushed. So that's why, and I did sort of make a point there that there's always one muscle contracting from a pair. And I said there's an exception. There is an exception. When we do some kind of static contraction, we call it an isometric contraction, but when we do something like a ski sit, when we do something like a ready position, when we do something like a balance in gymnastics or whatever, or we hold a position still, both muscles of the pair are contracting to hold it still. It's kind of, imagine I've got 6 bricks. I can't just apply force from one side to hold them still, right? I've got to apply force from both. It's called the principle of moments. I'm not going to get into it here, but that was the exception I was talking about.
Amazing. Brilliant. And then we've got a couple of shout outs. The first one goes to Phil Mather from the British International School.
Of course
from
it does.
Riyadh Diplomatic Quarter, probably one of the longest named schools.
So what is it? British International School of Riyadh Diplomatic Quarter. That is a long name for a school. That is a potentially very long email address. I hope they're using it.
Yes, they use an acronym. So yes, Phil's following our session. I don't know whether with or without students. I would imagine, considering the time in Riyadh, I would imagine it without students. But thank you. Yeah,
Phil of course, friend of us. We've done a couple of podcasts together. Had a chinwag here and there. We've even been in the pub together. There's where a rumor can start right there. And hopefully see you soon, Phil. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Yes, and we've also got Rushcliffe PE who sent an amazing picture of over 30 students. Yes, James?
Isn't that? Who's the teacher? Is that?
I think it's Lyndon Crawley.
It is
yes,
Lyndon,
I don't know if it's from Lyndon or not, but there are over 30 students there engaging in the revision, and I hear there is promise of pizza for those who attend session 2.
Come on.
So come on, session 2, not only amazing revision but also delicious pizza. I might join in.
I will give my 2 favourite pizza ingredients in session 2 Edexcel if there's enough people at Rushcliffe. I will, and they're controversial. I'm going to say that right now. So I'll hold you to that. Okay, let me just quickly check other things. I think we're okay, Marta. It's quite late. We want to get these guys out of here.
Everyone wants to go and have tea.
Folks, I really appreciate it. I need to go and have a big lie down because I'm shattered, although I think I'm taking my daughter to dance class. So, so that's my night. There's a bit of football on tonight. Who's playing? I think Liverpool playing and Man City playing, possibly West Ham might have made that up. Yeah, that's on tonight, I think. Let's see if we can get a bit there. Guys, I cannot stress enough how much I appreciate you taking part in the revision with me. Do not neglect that you can retake the session on demand or parts of it. You've got the mock exam, you've got the infographics, you've got the model answers and the mark schemes. Folks, that preparation is really robust, so do please consider it. Sorry, Marta, go on.
Just a shout out to Stevenage.
The Stevenage?
Yeah.
The whole place?
No. Yeah, I'm not sure. John Franklin, Stevenage. Yes.
Big shout out to Stevenage. Everyone loves Stevenage.
So yeah. I just wanted to get it done. Just came in, so
brilliant. Thank you, guys. I'm gonna give you a little bit of music to play out, and then we're gonna go and have supper. I hope you're gonna go and have dinner. I hope you guys are gonna do the same too. Have a great afternoon. Thank you again. We really appreciate it from Marta and me. Have a good one.